Hello and a very good evening to everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our Pivot in Progress session on landing high impact strategy and operations as well as chief of staff roles in today's rapidly evolving AI driven sort of an era. We have worked at Pivot with a lot of professionals who come from typical business school backgrounds or folks who are in these type of roles already, but we also work with a ton of people who have spent time across different career paths. Could be, let's say, tech oriented roles like project program management, or even product oriented roles, marketing and GTM and growth oriented roles, who want to get into strat ops or COS kind of roles, right? So there is a lot of I would say shift in the market dynamics for this particular role, whether you are already in this role as well as for people who are coming from outside this particular domain. So to discuss that today and unpack what all is happening, how do you ensure that you are optimizing your career trajectory in this particular path, we have a very experienced and really somebody who has spent a lot of time in these kind of roles, Shruti Rajaram. She's with us already backstage. I will be bringing her up here now. All right. Hi, Shruti. Welcome again. How are you doing?
Great. Thank you so much, Arjun. Good evening to everybody attending this.
Great. Thank you again for making time, Shruti. And I'm really excited for this because truly, I'll give you a little context. We at Pivot, we have worked with over 10,000 professionals and on different types of career goals when they're making a transition. And one of the most popular target roles for many, many individuals who work with us, typically people with anywhere between, I would say, 10 to 20 years experience, is something in strategy and operations or, chief of staff kind of roles. And when I posted about it on my LinkedIn account today as well, we see a lot of demand on the corporate side as well for this role, like a growing demand. So yeah, I'm really excited and really looking forward to get your insights on how people should be thinking about getting into these roles or advancing in this role. Before we do that, before we dive in, let's just do a quick round of intros. So I can go first. So for those who don't know me, my name is Arjun and I'm the founder of Pivot. And we started Pivot about more than 5 years ago. Worked with 10,000 plus professionals. And the core premise has been to help mid career professionals with different types of inflection point transitions. So, especially when people are not just job hopping, but let's say changing their industry, changing their level in the organization, changing their country, or trying to return to work after a bit of a gap. So all of these inflection points and some others as well, these are the focus areas for us. And the way we typically help people is through structured roadmaps so that you don't have to create your own playbooks, as well as one on one personalized mentorship from experts, including folks like Shruti as well. So that's a bit about what we do at Pivot. And I personally have worked within US as well as in India for the last 15 years. So I started my career in HR and management consulting, and then leading to starting Pivot. So I'll share more about Pivot during the course of the conversation, but I'll turn it over to Shruti for now. Shruti, welcome again. And if you could just tell us a little bit about your journey and what you do today, that would be great.
Yeah, no, thank you, Arjun. That was like a lot of context. And I think I'm also hearing about it for the first time. So interesting to see how one of the most misconstrued roles is now becoming a catch-all sort of a thing. So yeah, I'm happy that there are a lot of people who are today seeing this beyond just. I remember times where a chief of staff was misconstrued to be somewhere lingering over the HR boundaries, working on strategy in some other organizations. It was just like so many different things for different organizations, and I think
Yeah,
it's becoming a little bit more set now. So like you said, I'm guessing that's why this role is also coming out to shine, and
true.
yeah, it's becoming a little bit more standardized, which is great to hear. Yeah,
Mhm.
so about myself quickly, I'm Shruti. I'm a chartered accountant by qualification and worked on the M&A side of things initially when I started my career. So I did financial due diligence with KPMG, a little bit of investment banking as well because it was under the same charter back then. So then went on to working with BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, which was my foray into everything strategy, a lot of structure, and realized that I really enjoyed the process of thinking and then continuing to look at it from an implementation standpoint for large organizations. Um, so I think that was an inflection in terms of working and looking from the strategic lens, really. And because data was somehow in the background and always a part of what I've done, it sort of helped in um, doing more of formulating strategy and formulating a synthesized thesis around this.
Mhm.
But also was quick to realize that consulting involved a lot of it was, I mean, as great as these organizations are, there's a lot of bureaucracy and the autonomy levels that later startups began to offer. There was no going back after this. So sort of met one of the Chennai-based startups called Pando, worked with them in their pre-sale solution engineering team, which was great because that was again foray into SaaS, and that was like keeping my ears really close to customer, translating it into product feedback, and the turnaround time, the autonomy, and the level of um, trust in building and seeing through a process was definitely exciting and kept me going in SaaS. After which, I worked with Yellow, set up and operated the strategy team there. It was sort of multi-hatting, working across multiple parts of the SaaS organization itself, bringing an outside-in view, inside-out view in terms of new products, existing product expansion, and RR portfolio, a bunch of those sort of real business problems before we found an adjacency inside of Yellow itself and went on to run that vertical as a BU for Yellow, which is everything on employee experience automation. It was the era of HR tech with companies like Lena and Fido really um, raising large rounds. So
Mm.
that was an interesting part of almost like doing like a little bit of a startup inside of a larger company like Yellow, and definitely the organization was trying to offer that. Uh, Post which I've done my recent stint with SuperOps. SuperOps with more full spectrum. Started off with the chief of staff with the founder, which means multiple things, and we'll unpack some of this. But this can mean everything from running a vertical, running the sales and GTM engine, understanding new markets, formulating our own thesis on whether we should enter that, what is the outside in versus inside out view on that, juxtaposing one on top of the other and really seeing if this makes business commercial sense. The other side could be everything on fundraise, um, M&A, maintaining investor relationships. Yet another day could involve working on the product roadmap. So this is really a meaty role, a lot of things that it had to offer, and working very closely with
Right.
the founder. Post which I went
Mm.
on to lead the strategy wing as the head of strategy there itself.
Got it. Got it. Brilliant. I think very interesting journey, and I think one that a lot of people would be vying for themselves, at least based on our experience. I know so many business school graduates, people from other tech backgrounds, also like looking to get into startups and COS kind of roles today. So it is something that is becoming a kind of like a highly competitive premium role in the market. And like you said, it wasn't so well established and structured earlier, and it may still not be 100% there, but we are seeing more and more kind of standardization in some ways, where companies are defining specific expectations around these roles, especially in a nascent market like India for something like this. So yeah, let's dive right into it. I think the first thing that I want to really start off with, Shruti, is trying to understand, just like you said, what these roles today entail and what has that evolution been like, not just for you specifically, but overarchingly the landscape that you see for these roles. Like for example, can we use certain of these role terms interchangeably? Like would stat ops and COS versus let's say program management, or founders office roles, they kind of use a bit interchangeably in the market right now, especially in India. Do you see that there are a lot of overlaps, or do you think there are distinct roles with different set of responsibilities and expectations typically?
Yeah. So yes, these are definitely used interchangeably today, but in my experience and working largely with early stage companies, the lines are a bit blurry. But I think from a DNA standpoint, especially if you talk about a chief of staff versus what you do from a like a head of strategy role, the DNA of it is slightly different, and I think it takes that sort of a shift to really comprehend the role and understand how you want to place. Um, an example could be when you're working as a chief of staff, it could be for any function, right? Typically, we think of it as the CEO's office, CEO's chief of staff, but slightly mature organizations also hire chief of staffs for the revenue head. We've had HR heads have their own chief of staff, product head. So it's really, working in synthesis and taking over responsibilities of a particular individual. So the level of collaboration and mental mapping that you have to do with that individual, I would index that a little bit more in a chief of staff role, because you relay that sentiment, right? And for that sentiment to match, then you've got to ensure that you and that person who you're working with have the same level of energy or the same level of conviction about any thought process. Yes, you have access to a lot of ground reality data, let's say. You have the authority to work from that desk and steer a lot of internal functions cross collaboratively. But
Hmm.
at the end of the day, you relay the sentiment of that individual you're working with, and I see that as one speaking on cross collaborative authority because it comes from the CEO or whoever, right, the head himself or herself. But
Yeah.
also, more importantly, um, it is relaying that one sentiment consistently. Whereas, organizations which have set up a strategy wing altogether, which need not necessarily be the CEO's office itself, looks at
Hmm.
it more from a lens of yet another function or yet another opportunity angle that they're looking at from setting up this function.
Hmm.
And I'd say the air cover from the other leadership maybe is not as tight in like a head of strategy sort of a role. Whereas now you are sort of drawing out strategies to the T, ensuring that you are also driving it from an implementation angle when it is purely strategically focused, right? Um, as a chief of staff, at least from my experience, I could plug into any part of the organization, and there was receptiveness because you're not stepping on anybody's shoes. It's really like looking at it from a larger lens, and having that sort of access. In terms of a
Hmm.
more strategic role, you will also, I feel, the importance to deliver and implement and showcase and build that sort of conviction in others about your work becomes important. You also spoke about project management and certain other roles, and these have in different organizations nested themselves under either the CEO's office or sometimes under the strategic wing. So yeah, it really depends on the stage of the organization. Initially, in early stages, everything is sort of muffled. You're like it's chaotic. You're
It's
trying
a
to
wild,
manage
wild west,
it
right?
is. And you're trying
Yeah.
to multi-hat at any point in time. But as the organization matures, some of these rules sort of pave way for others. And I guess there are various paths and various landing avenues um, that some of these roles have offered. And this is one of the most common trajectories that I've seen from transitioning from a chief of staff to owning a vertical, or
Hmm.
transitioning from a chief of staff to owning strategy, more overarchingly looking at the market and identifying new opportunities. So all of these are
Right.
things that present themselves as
Right.
the DNA of the organization also matures, I guess.
Very well structured answer. I think I could really sort of connect the dots on how it has been where it is today, and kind of especially how StratOps versus COS kind of plays out. Just one thing that I want to understand a little bit more. So sometimes, we hear that even though you're, at the intersection of various functional collaborations that's happening in these roles, right? And you're kind of like the spark for kind of driving certain strategic priorities and making sure different functions are not being siloed, they're working closely together. But who really owns the outcomes on those core projects, right? Because if like it's kind of like one of those roles where you have to influence without authority, and you don't really own outcomes, but your own performance is measured on how those outcomes are driven. That's got to be very tricky, right? Like, so how does that work? I'm really interested in knowing that for both COS and strat ops roles.
Um, Great question, and one of the most practically challenging parts of the role, I would say. So two parts to this answer. Let's look at how receptiveness of an organization is, and how sometimes positioning ourselves as an extension of a particular arm, and also relaying through like cadences. Cadences are one part that has really worked in ensuring cross collaborative uh, energy as well as ownership in most of what I've done. So structuring those cadences is a good segue to start and solve this sort of a problem, right? Because then you can sort of bring people together, list out what each of them want to do without really stepping on their shoes, understand what they're trying to solve, because everybody is in the company to solve something, right? Like something that they think is the most burning problem. So the hierarchy, the stack ranking of it is what could vary between organizations or internally between functions that could cause friction, and that friction sort of comes back to um, either dropping the ball on outcomes or coming back to just how there is no alignment, and the CEO's office or some of these generic roles bear the brunt of it. I think both of it can be avoided with more structured cross collaboration, um, bringing a method to the madness firstly, and then showcasing how the function can be an extension of any of these BUs or any of these verticals, which means you're a generalist, but when you have to dive into a particular problem and solve for it, especially because you have the full spectrum view, and you're plugged into every part of the organization, ideally all of this is coming back and sort of setting itself to you, then that that is a powerful engine that you can use to your advantage in these roles, I feel, and often undermined as well, because then you don't look as a competitor to any functional leader,
Right.
but you're working and plugging yourself into their charter, extending what they do, and that's a good way to know business as you enter the role, also own outcomes and show that you problem solve for something. So I feel like this has worked from a chief of staff standpoint, especially because, like you said, the authority comes from the CEO himself or herself. So setting that up and setting that up for success is sort of their prerogative as much as it is for a person working under them. The
Mhm.
second part is how OKRs and functional strengths like this can be driven from this powerhouse. And once you're setting that up for the entire organization, you're also tagging it back. I think like some of these are loosely related to variable pay in certain cases. OKRs and variable pay are like very distinct factors which sometimes needs a round of education. You can nest KRAs, joint outcomes that people can own together, and then driving it with a lot of metrics because data speaks the truth at any point in time, right? So driving it with a lot of those sort of metrics, understanding how metrics have performed over the course of time has really been a good way to sort of tie all of these outcomes back, and also hive it off to specific functions. So yeah, these are two things that have worked from my stints with these roles.
Okay. Can you give me, just before we move on to the next thing, because I think there's one of the most fascinating aspects of this role, and we do get a lot of questions around, when people are contemplating either getting into it or trying to advance their career, thinking about how they're going to navigate the internal sort of team dynamics and cross-functional collaborations. Um, what are perhaps, like, let's say maybe one project that you have worked on, and you don't have to share any confidential details, but like any sort of a project that you have worked on where you were in the middle of multi-stakeholder kind of a project, and you had to coordinate and work together with multiple teams. What were some of the OKRs and how did you drive it for that particular project?
Perfect. So let me talk about one of the most, I think most organizations sort of look at this as a taboo topic, the pricing change or like when you move a pricing model internally, especially in large
Hmm.
B2B SaaS organizations. Um,
Hmm.
your one is you could bump up prices, but your revenue engine is probably happy about it, but your customer success engine and those who are already facing the brunt of existing customer feedback is definitely not happy. And there's constantly something from a product delivery standpoint, um, from an adoption standpoint, etc., that you have to bake into some of the pricing changes that you have to make. So yeah, this was one project that I thought like could be, it's fairly relatable to anybody in any sort of setup. Let it be consumer, let it be B2B, let it be SaaS. And with the advent of AI and how much we're indexing on co-pilots versus driving tokenization and all of it, I think really figuring out pricing has been a lot of leaders are scratching their heads over this. So this was one very recent project, but also something that ensured multiple rounds of iteration and multiple rounds of changes
Hmm.
in even the thought structure. So yes, I'll talk to you a little bit more in depth about this. So some organizations are used to working with a particular way in which they price their product, right? Now this is a factor of whether they want to be transparent, how big is your market, does it, how many incumbents are there, whether there is red ocean, blue ocean, all of those, right? So you would choose between contact me pricing versus transparent pricing out on the website, and how you choose to drive traffic and how you choose to position yourself as an organization with the price that you're delivering. Do you want to be the cheapest kid on the block? Do you want to set yourself for like a fairly mature audience right at the beginning itself? So all of these
Hmm.
factors come into play when you decide your pricing, and then it's the
Hmm.
unit of pricing, right? Like, do you price it um, various ways per
Hmm.
license, per seat versus sometimes clustered, who is your target audience and all of those.
Hmm.
Now one such project was really changing the method of pricing itself, right? Like while we were following, let's say, a particular license based pricing, maybe that wasn't working in the market anymore. We had matured from a product standpoint, we had matured from an adoption standpoint, and with the advent of AI coming in and co-pilots sort of hitting or missing the mark in the way they were structured in different organizations. Tokenization was not set in its threshold. With all of it, a change in the method of pricing by itself was important to do, and it also had like various trickle down benefits working into the ecosystem. Now, this means you're making everybody in the organization believe that we have to one change the way we've priced our product all along, but also showcase that this opens doors to a lot more ecosystem benefits that there could be. Now, this will
Hmm.
come only when you've probably started to run with it, ensure that you're able to translate it into real time motion, show that there's traction in this through like small pods, A B test this in the market, and then take feedback. So you have your revenue leader probably the first to have a buy in, because this is going to be a bump in pricing with the same sort of target that they have staring at them. This could work in their favor sometimes. But the
Hmm.
existing customer success organization is definitely not going to be happy about this, because a lot of existing customers need to see the ROI in this sort of a price change before they start paying for this. And what if they already had some, um, problems either with the product, slowness, whatever there is? So how do you go back and ensure that they're seeing the ROI in this? Again, that's a model where you cohort your customers, ensure that nobody is really um, having to drastically change from a pricing standpoint, but again, show them that this is a sliver of the ROI that they could get if they move to the new pricing. And then comes the
Hmm.
product team, where you're going to have to push them to say that, hey, this is a drastic change in the market. Let's pack a little bit more into this new product that we're launching, so that existing customers as well as new ones see the benefit of this sort of a translation. So, yeah, there is no one size fits all in this. Like I was saying, different cohorts of customers could see the benefit of this. Some of them could see that they were better off paying the previous sum. But it's really about owning this sort of an outcome, putting one particular metric to this. You either want to increase your ACV sizes, you want to target a different audience altogether, or you want to change your marketing methodology itself. You focus heavily on inbound, your website and pricing page had to do a lot of heavy lifting. Whereas now you want to sort of shift gears to say that, hey, we've matured as a product. We serve the enterprise layer or whatever, the slightly more mature audience. And
Yeah.
so that shift is sort of reflected here. Yeah, this has a lot of opinions, none of it really right or wrong.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess taking all of that in and working iteratively, constantly changing what you thought would be the end result, and finally seeing it through was a lot of effort for sure.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And I like how, you kind of have to balance so many different priorities, both from internal stakeholder perspective, because you have certain people who are very pro the agenda of that project, some people who are causing friction because they know they'll have to deal with customer pain points, and how do you balance all of that? I think that's very interesting. Um, just I think now let's focus on the next thing, which is, in my view, one of the more uh, practical question that we get when people are in the trenches of, let's say, trying to land the best role possible in the market for a strat ops and COS roles. um, what are the top qualities, characteristics, achievements or experiences that companies today are indexing on for the best in class candidates in this particular role?
Yeah, so I think again it depends on the stage of the company and what their priorities are. But if typically the CEO's desk is structured in slightly, let's say, if I'm talking about a CDC plus sort of a company, and that's just like just using it today loosely for looking at a benchmark of organizational maturity. It's not really a yardstick, but this is sort of the general pattern that we've seen. At a CDC level, a CEO's office is broken down into sometimes handling everything investor relationship, fundraise, investor relationship, and all of this is one part of it. The second thing is everything GTM customer facing, and usually they have a third piece, which could be product facing. Sometimes organizations also choose to expand into um, expansion from your current customer base and looking at adoption of this. So these are like typically 3 to 4 that I've seen in B2B SaaS and pretty commonly across most other um, industries. So fairly industry agnostic when you look at like 4 or 5 layers of this. For all of this, the underlying one DNA factor that anybody would be looking for is to get your hands dirty, the agility, how fast you're able to sort of implement, show traction without or with handling authority and title. It's not necessary that you're not like, it's not always said that authority and title is given as in these roles. But you're able to sort of plug yourself in and out of a lot of these problem statements that get thrown at you. 70% of your day is unstructured, and that will be a good
Wow.
day. Uh, and the remaining 30% that you have, you try and hold on to maintaining consistency in that. But that again comes through, through practice, to setting it up as your own sort of, hey, these are the things that I will continue to own. Really, let's say, like, data has always been something that I've held closely, and irrespective, I think I ensure that a good percentage of my portfolio would always have the underlying data DNA, which helps me sort of have that overarching view of multiple other things as well. So I think they're looking for people who can hold to that um, a little bit of method in the mad world out there. So
Yeah.
yeah, keeping yourselves extremely structured, bringing that structure to the organization means like I think working in a very structured fashion as an individual. So being able to do that and relay that across an organization is definitely a DNA trait. And then I also think, like, willingness to solve any problem thrown at you also means that there is no fear in jumping into a problem, not knowing the depth of it at all, right? So you're quick to just take it on, do the research you have to, build conviction very quickly, and help in implementation as well. So, yeah, anybody who's willing to take that plunge quite immediately would definitely be successful in this role. And I think organizations are increasingly looking at that as an important trait.
Got it. And just one question there is, I mean, is more broad, and I think you've sort of indirectly already answered it, but just to kind of hit it on the head, are organizations, let's say at Series C or D, wherever you want to focus, typically when they hire, are they looking for somebody who really checks these boxes based on the JD? Or do they also have some adaptability and flexibility based on the individual's strengths and kind of what value they particularly bring to the table? Because we have seen, like, a lot of times it's not just about what the organization wants, but what the individual can do, and sort of
Right.
creating a role around their skill set. So is there that flexibility from most organizations, or is it kind of one off that you will see certain organizations or startups in India who would be open to something like that?
Actually, till date, I've never seen a perfect JD for this role
Yeah.
that also matches all the skill sets of an individual, right? Just because of the way the function is. If you ask me to write this down entirely, I sort of really struggle in putting it all together in a single page or whatever, right? Your resume and CV. So it's just the nature of the role, and I don't think any JD can do justice to that. So
Hmm.
especially at Series C, Series D level that you're talking about, it is not as chaotic as a Series A, Series B company where you're hitting 0 to 1 or like 1 to 10 million or whatever you want to call that, and the
Right.
processes are not really set in stone yet. But at a
Hmm.
Series C level, especially like depending on again the DNA, is it like a bootstrap company versus a company that has raised from the market, and all of that also is a factor in determining how processes are set and whether they're set or not for various organizations. Because sometimes VCs or investors have a method to putting a lot of these in um, actionable metrics, right? So once you're tracking that, then it sort of fits into a JD better because the metrics are coming externally, and then you'll have to sort of um, repurpose some of those and sort of internally roll it out in your organization, and then that is a little bit more of structure that's offered as well. So yeah, the
Hmm.
maturity of the organization plays an important role in this. But like you said, these roles are, while there are like 3 to 4 charters, I think organizations are incrementally open to looking at what you can bring to the table as an individual. Do your strengths predominantly lie in um, let's say data and operations, or have you done more of investor collaboration? Um, are you plugged into sort of just running some of these cadences for them, right?
Yeah,
Which
like GTM or something like that. Yeah.
exactly, which can feed a little bit into project management as well. Or are you
Yeah.
ready to sort of own something like a completely different trajectory or a completely different outcome that you can bring to the table of the company? So all of
Hmm.
these are open for these roles, and I think it's sort of conversations and interviews unpack some of these while we
Yeah.
try to plant a person into the organization. So it's
And
at
some of
least
it, I imagine, must be like you sort of indicated earlier. It kind of bounces off the CEO or whoever you're kind of covering for, their specific skill set and their expectations too from you, right? Like, because let's say there are certain things they just don't like doing, or they find less time to do. I think they might want to offload more of those things and keep the ones that they like doing more towards to themselves, like something like that. Is that
exact
something that you see as well?
absolutely, because some of the best hiring managers, right, like whoever is looking to hire for this role, is a person who I think has put their finger on what they have really excelled in bringing, and where they see that a little bit of air cover from another person could help them.
Hmm.
So if that
Hmm.
level of introspection is done, and somebody is
Hmm.
able to translate this very clearly to a person joining, then you hit a gold mine. Like I don't know if we encounter this often, not because of the lack of leadership, but primarily because I think there is just no time, and the kind of problems that get thrown at any individual also can be so varyingly, starkly different for different organizations at different points in time for the same individual also. So yeah, so while there is a little bit of flexibility also that you will have to account for
Nice.
when you're interviewing for some of these roles, I think a person who's able to translate this and keep the um, put it down into a JD and sort of talk about where the complementary skill sets are, uh, would be would be a great person to work for. And this is also a two-way street, right? Like while organizations are searching for some of these individuals, as an individual, it's
Mhm.
important to map yourself to the right uh, organization, and
Yeah.
you are also testing over the course of interview for some of these traits that you're seeing, and it's important to keep an eye out for all of this. So yeah, that I think is definitely something that like it is a two-way street at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was just going to say, I'm glad you brought it up because I was going to say that the onus is as much on you as it is on the organization to figure out where you would fit into the, the kind of organizational requirements, where the gaps are, and not just for, functional gaps per se, but more like individual related skill gaps. Because if again your CEO is somebody who's looking for you to, for example, do a lot of communications on their behalf, you might need that skill set, right? And you it's not expected of every COS or every strat ops person, but if your particular CEO is looking for something like that, then you have to meet them where they are. But yeah, I think valid points. Before we move on to the next topic for this discussion, I just wanted to address the audience in the room. Thank you again for joining us on Thursday evening, taking precious time out from your day. In case you all have any questions for Shruti, please do share them in chat or on LinkedIn. Either way is fine. And I would say that there are no bad questions right now. So whatever you have in mind with regard to StratOps, COS, or related roles, and whether you are in the role or want to break into it, either way, please share questions. I know some of you have already shared it previously, so we will be taking those up as well. But if there are any new questions, please do feel free to share them. With that behind us, Shruti, the next thing that I wanted to talk about is I might have lost connection again. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think I lost you for a couple of seconds. Back here.
Yeah, I think I'm just having some internet hiccups. No, what I was saying is now comes the part which I think a lot of our audiences will find very, very tangible takeaways, so to speak, and start applying them, because now we're going to talk about how to really land the best roles possible within the market, right? And the first thing that I want to understand from you is it is a fairly crowded market, especially for these kind of roles. There's even more competition because you have people not just from StatOps background, but somebody from product or GTM or, like I said, program management, founder's office, many, many different types of candidates vying for few openings. So how do you stand out in a crowded job market for this kind of a role? Are there any unique, new agey sort of strategies that you have been able to see from either side, whether as a candidate or as a hiring manager, which you feel are creating better impact and helping people land better roles?
Right. Uh, yeah, again, I don't know if there's a one size fits all answer in this, but I can talk to you a little bit from my experience of how like the advent of AI is definitely the new norm, and everybody is talking about it across multiple roles as well as different industries. So I think sort of getting your hands dirty on something, building and showcasing some of this, I think people appreciate a lot more when you have an outcome that you've developed and you're able to talk about it from like a formulation to end, because ultimately what they're looking for is whether you've been able to sort of plug yourself into that problem, how you're able to articulate it, and finally also deliver on an output. And all of that comes through, especially when you're building something nimble also on AI, sometimes a problem that the organization might itself want to solve, right? So I've usually seen that people have um, come out a little stronger when they've been able to take the problem statement of the organization. It also tells you how serious that person is um, in these choppy waters that otherwise could be, right? They've taken a problem statement and they've taken the time and effort to sort of build something as nimble, and they have a thought process behind what they've done. So taking something showcasing it has always been a standout place. But also looking at portfolios of some of the VCs, and looking at roles in those, understanding the DNA of the organization before you apply for certain roles has also been another good way to land impactful opportunities, because um, if in the past you've worked with one of the investors or you have somebody who has worked closely with the particular portfolio, it's always good to check on where their portfolio stands today, whether they're hiring for some of these roles, and then land it with impact, because then you have somebody who has vested interest in the organization pushing for this sort of a role, right?
Mm.
And that referencing is taken super seriously. So I think, yeah, that's also created a lot of impact. I also think like sort of structuring something as simple as a CV, but supplementing it with like the best work that you've done or talking about it,
Mm.
putting it down together has also um, enable hiring managers to have that resonance with the individual itself. So, yeah, again, they're looking for structure in your thought process, and the more you can showcase it um, in your resume or in the work that you've done, it hits home closer, I'd say.
Okay. And I mean, in terms of showcasing that, so I mean, I think some of the things that you've mentioned, like for example, alignment with the specific majority of the organization, the gaps that exist, and how you are the right person to plug those, or matching the sort of vibe of the CEO, kind of the same energy. Um, how do you showcase that before, let's say, an interview? Is there any way to kind of send strong signals through your application, whether it's resume, portfolio, cover letter, something else like maybe a direct message to the key stakeholders at the company? How would you showcase it?
Yeah, I mean, with like Claude and GPT working as extended arms for everybody, I think once you look at an organization or a particular role that they put out in their career site, let's say, you can go to like real depths of understanding the market, um, and all of that information comes to you at one place, right? It's not just about understanding that particular company, but also where the competitive landscape is. And then what are the new sort of verticals they have launched? What is their conviction in the next market? And then once you have all this information in front of you, you also have a you can sort of read between the lines to see which is their most recent initiative, um, where are they looking to go with this. So these are some things that interviewees typically look for when you're talking to them, right? Because they're looking at whether you've read between the lines, you're seeing whether that new initiative, or let's say a new product that a particular company has launched, whether you're able to talk about it and what it could be in the next 3 years, right? um, and whether that is a good decision or not, there's no right or wrong answer, but it is an interview and you can always be vocal about whether you think it's steering the ship too off course, or whether you feel like in the competitive landscape there are other competitors who've stayed rooted to one particular product itself and they have done like well for themselves. So that conversation is, I think, what most people are looking for, but it also means like doing your research about the individual as well as the organization before you go into a role. And yeah, I think there's no dearth of opportunity or information, especially at your fingertips with all of this. So yeah, reading between the lines is the strategic lens that you're bringing, and you don't always hit it right. You should be open with the fact that it is a hit or miss. It is your opinion, and it's okay to have that opinion because you're developing on it from an industry standpoint, and also as an individual. Um, your conviction is what it is. So if it doesn't sort of land with who you're speaking with, then I think that openness to say that yes, there are two different ways to steer the ship, but this is what you would have done if you were in their place is still the right answer. Might not be the right answer for that person or that company at that particular point in time for various reasons. So that openness is also something I take to the interview.
Hmm. Got it. Um, I want to start taking up some of the questions that have come up in the chat. Just before we do that, is there any candidate that you are aware of, and maybe if there's something that you have done for your own job search or transitions, that's fair game as well. But is there any candidate who kind of has stood out to you when they have applied for strategy oriented kind of roles in the way they presented themselves, and you just saw that as a new way to kind of apply to roles, or something that really left a deep impact on you?
Yeah, so I think I sort of borrowed this from one of the candidates I spoke with, and it was actually very invigorating, and like multiple resumes that just keep hitting your inbox. Where we launched a new product, and this person has sort of built out a model with the new product itself, talking about where the competition is. Well, they don't have the metrics, they don't have the numbers in hand today, but just the thought process with the assumptions well jotted down, and sort of talking to me about how this is not the best course of action for the company, and really challenging the core was a great conversation to have for sure. Right or wrong answer apart, I like the fact that there was a lot of thought process that went into this, and that sort of stuck on to me.
Got it. Got it. Okay. All right, let's take up some of these questions here, and yeah, I'm sure there will be more that come soon. But the first one that we have, I'm gonna show it up here on the screen from Srinivasan. So thanks for asking this question, Srinivasan. Then the question is, how do you not end up being a pseudo voice implementer of the founder CEO thought process while playing the COS role? And we've touched upon this tangentially. I believe he wants to address it more directly. I think it's very, very interesting question. I think you have touched upon it indirectly, perhaps, Shruti. But yeah, any
Yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah, so this is the challenging part of the role, right? You're sort of being a body double to the CEO or whoever, you're being the chief of staff to. But this is where I'd say that having or like over communicating and also ensuring that you have a seat in the table for anything that you're driving, and unless you agree entirely and you have full conviction in this is not like rolled out, or you're just not being the voice, like you say, of that individual, is something that comes with time, yes, but also is important for this person who's doing this role to put their foot down and make space for, right? So that comes with practice, that comes with how initially you're sort of reading that individual, you're reading the founder or the CEO in this case, taking on and consuming how they sort of navigate through some of the problems. And then, like, having your own thought process on where you could have navigated it or you would have navigated it differently, and having the space to sort of go back and relay this, and that space to sort of talk about how this should openly be addressed in a different way. Now, that involves a lot of receptiveness from that founder or CEO as well, because you can imagine this is like, every organization is the founder's own baby, and we hold those really close to ourselves, right? So, yeah, it's not easy to hear a no from anybody, more so when I think, like, for some of these high impact roles. But a person who's sort of self-reflected to do that, and it's the onus of the individual who's hiring you more than yourself, to create that space really. But what's important is constantly having that seat in the table, and even if you choose to disagree in some places, right? Now this is where things can take a little bit of a turn. But even if you choose to disagree, but you commit to certain things, that's also an important trait. You could have different thought processes sometimes, like, uh, you feel like the way you want to do it is the right way to do it, and you have the space to do it. But at certain other times, there's probably more conviction from the founder, and you take a bow, you say that, all right, I disagree, but I commit to running this outcome. So those are, I think, like important traits in being a chief of staff. And there's no right answer to this, but like over communication has generally been a good way to do this. Absolute transparent communication.
Yeah, makes sense. So I guess you got to try and read the situation and see where there is appetite for, let's say, pushback and kind
Yeah.
of new strategies and thoughts. And there are times when you just kind of take the mission as is, and you're the executor more. Okay. All right, great. The other question we have is from Sagar Deshpande, and again, I'm showing it up here. What is the best way to transition into a StratOps role from pure operations management profile? That's a actually I should have already covered this question because this is a common one that we do get. Um, One thing that I want to highlight here, Sagar, just for the benefit of everybody who might be reading this or watching this, there are different types of operations roles, right? So some of the operation roles are in like the manufacturing and physical goods oriented kind of organizations where it's kind of like supply chain and like how you run the manufacturing operations and those kind of things. But then there are a lot of other non physical goods oriented kind of operational roles where it's more about setting up the processes, the SOPs, and ensuring that different functions are running efficiently, their day-to-day business processes. I would imagine that, Sagar, the question is more for people from the second or the latter profile, because the first one we generally don't see a lot of transitions happening between kind of like manufacturing operations, supply chain, logistics, those kind of roles to start oriented roles. So yeah, I mean, I would say, Shruti, perhaps you can share your thoughts on this, and also like whatever I have mentioned, if you want to sort of validate or invalidate that, please feel free to do
No,
that.
absolutely. I mean, see, pure operations management it also means that you've had that lens to beat the problem multiple times. Maybe solve for it like differently, but you know the crux of the problem really well. And when you're ready to transition uh, this into a scalable playbook of sorts for any organization, is how you sort of position yourself into the strategic side of things, right? So everything is about establishing playbooks at scale, and whether you want to run with a playbook or you want to run with a problem, what is your core? Like some individuals are amazing at setting some of these processes the way Arjun was talking about, right? And then running with it multiple times to sort of beat the playbook. But sometimes you've also sort of seen this enough that you feel like you can bring a strategic lens to this, and that's when you sort of look at the underlying in all of these problem statements you solve and build a playbook at scale so that you can transition yourself into strategy ops. But whether you enjoy doing that playbook and scaling it is the real question, because then you're doing it like multiple times for 0 to 1 and not really the same process over and over. So I think this is more of an internal reflection question than a CV change or just positioning and going and figuring out your next role of sorts.
Got it. Okay. I think those were the two main questions. The only other question that we have right now, and this is maybe a little too broad. I don't know if you will have a thought specifically on this, but we did get a question before the session around how is the current job market suited to uh, folks who may not already be in StratOps but are trying to break into it from different profiles. Like I actually the question did not have like which profile this person is from, but let's say they are from GTM or product background. Do you think the market is currently conducive for these kind of shifts to happen, or do you think companies are primarily hiring folks who already have been in very specifically these type of roles?
Yeah, I think the market and the sentiment is navigating one of the largest changes, right? Like, again, both the stock market also is sort of reflective of how AI and things like that have come in to change organizations and how certain roles were positioned for. So, this is also the right sort of juncture to look at how everybody is on a fair level playing field today, because before the strategy powerhouse used to use um, that that knowledge or the knowledge base as their avenue of strength, but today all of that can be dumped into an AI engine, let's say, and that owns the context. So what you're really hired for is whether you're able to problem solve on top of it and direct it. So this means that everybody who's had like various degrees, held these positions before, are all on the same level playing field, because they don't hold that context as um, the real spike in their resume anymore. So I think there is definitely openness and receptiveness in looking at core strengths. So it's like, predominantly you had core strengths in adjacencies or alternatives, then positioning that, but also positioning it for an organization could sort of let you know if there is openness. I believe that there is, the market is a lot more receptive to new individuals trying to try this than like incumbents itself. Yeah, but I think the roles are also more defined and more open today. So plugging that
Yeah.
from a sliver of what you've done could be a good way to approach it also.
Great. All right. I believe we have covered a lot of ground today. Shruti, thanks again for sharing your thoughts so candidly and kind of, in a structured way, which really helps people take away tangible, actionable insights that they can start applying. I think that's the main goal of these sessions. And I think for such an important topic in the, career realm right now, I think I hope that we have covered all the key points. Still, there are times when folks may not have gotten the exact information that they were looking for, perhaps because you didn't raise your hand. So that's okay if you didn't want to talk about your particular situation. That's why we have Pivot. So feel free to check out Pivot. The website URL is in my signature. It's mypivot.work, where you can connect with industry experts like Shruti and others and get one-on-one feedback regarding your specific situation, your background, your goals. Right? I think that, like Shruti mentioned multiple times during this call, especially with regard to this role, there's no one size fit all. So you really want to contextualize your problem statement before you start applying some of the takeaways. But with that said, I really do appreciate your time and insights, Shruti, and thanks again, everybody, for joining. Shruti, any parting thoughts with regard to the topic or anything that you would like to share before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like we opened with the fact that this is getting more structured. I think it's one of the best times to be like, planted in this role for anybody who's looking to be a founder tomorrow, for anybody who's looking to really run businesses. This is the closest it can get to, ownership. And I think enjoying the space and getting as much out of it for yourself is as important as you deliver for the company. We often forget that in like the trenches that we're held in constantly. So it's important to have an end goal and see that this is the closest to founder journey in many cases, and yeah, try to fit yourself there to get an answer maybe for something.
Perfect. All right, great. On that note, I think we are ready to wrap things up. Thank you again, everybody, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening. Thanks again, Shruti.